The clock tower chimed a mournful tune as Tabitha Olsen collapsed on the church steps, her pristine wedding gown billowing around her like a deflated cloud of shattered dreams. Through tear-blurred eyes, she stared at the empty dirt road leading to Kingman's only church, a stark reminder that Clayton Davies, her fiancé of 2 years, had abandoned her on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Kingman, Arizona, 1885, was unforgiving in June. The merciless sun beat down on Tabitha's exposed shoulders as she sat motionless, ignoring the sympathetic whispers of townsfolk who'd gathered to witness her humiliation. Her father, the town's respected banker, had already stormed off in a fury, while her mother attempted to usher the guests away with forced smiles and hollow excuses. "Miss, you'll get heatstroke sitting out here," came a deep voice that pulled her from her misery. Tabitha looked up through swollen eyelids to see Xavier Reeves, his tall frame blocking the sun like a merciful eclipse. She'd seen him around town, the quiet cowboy who'd arrived last winter and taken work at the Wilkinson Ranch. His reputation was that of a hard worker with few words, though the ladies in town whispered about his striking blue eyes and the mysterious scar that ran along his jawline. "I don't care," she replied, her voice hoarse from crying. "He left me at the altar." Xavier removed his hat, revealing dark hair damp with sweat. He studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Then I'll wait at the same steps tomorrow." "What?" Tabitha blinked in confusion. "Tomorrow noon I'll be here." He replaced his hat, tipped the brim, and walked away without further explanation, leaving Tabitha bewildered amidst her heartbreak. Tabitha's mother finally coaxed her home, where she spent the evening alternating between sobbing and staring vacantly at the ceiling. The Olsen household, normally so full of warmth and laughter, had turned into a tomb of whispers and worried glances. "You need to eat something, dear," her mother urged, placing a bowl of stew beside her bed that evening. "I'm not hungry," Tabitha replied, turning her face to the wall. "That Clayton Davies never deserved you," her mother said with unexpected vehemence. "Your father is already making arrangements to pursue legal action for the breach of promise." Tabitha closed her eyes, too exhausted to explain that no lawsuit could mend her broken heart. The humiliation stung worse than the abandonment. Everyone in Kingman now pitied her. Poor Tabitha Olsen, left waiting at the altar like a forgotten parcel. The next morning arrived with brutal clarity. Tabitha rose early, having barely slept. She mechanically helped her mother with breakfast, deaf to the concerned queries about her well-being. The wedding dress had been stuffed unceremoniously into a trunk, out of sight but impossible to forget. As noon approached, Tabitha found herself drawn toward the church, not entirely certain why. Perhaps to confront the scene of her humiliation, or maybe, though she wouldn't admit it, curious about Xavier Reeves's strange promise. She wore a simple blue dress, her honey-colored hair pinned back without its usual care. The church steps loomed before her, empty in the midday sun. She hesitated, feeling foolish for having come. Then a figure appeared from around the corner. Xavier Reeves, dressed not in his usual work clothes but in a clean white shirt and dark vest, stood at the bottom of the steps. His hat was in his hands, and beside him sat a small basket. "You came," he said simply. "I don't know why I did," she replied truthfully. Xavier climbed 2 steps, still keeping a respectful distance. "I brought lunch. Thought you might not have much appetite but still need to eat." Tabitha stared at him, perplexed by his behavior. "Mr. Reeves, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not looking for charity or pity." "This isn't either," he replied. "Just one person offering another a meal and maybe a moment's peace." There was something in his directness that disarmed her usual defenses. Against her better judgment, Tabitha sat down on the step. Xavier joined her, keeping a proper distance, and opened the basket to reveal fresh bread, cheese, and 2 apples. They ate in silence for several minutes before Tabitha finally asked, "Why are you doing this?" Xavier considered her question while carefully cutting a slice of cheese. 4 years ago, I was engaged to a woman in Colorado. Sarah was her name. Morning of the wedding, she ran off with a salesman passing through town. He handed her the slice of cheese. Know what it feels like to stand alone when you're supposed to stand with someone. Tabitha accepted the cheese, surprised by his candor. "I'm sorry that happened to you. Been a long time now," he said with a slight shrug. "But yesterday, seeing you sitting here, remembered how nobody knew what to say to me afterward. How everyone looked at me with pity. How I wished someone had just sat with me without trying to fix everything." For the first time since Clayton had abandoned her, Tabitha felt something other than grief and humiliation. It was understanding, pure and simple. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the food and for understanding." Xavier nodded, his eyes meeting hers briefly before returning to his meal. They finished eating without further conversation, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. As Xavier packed up the basket, he said, "I'll be here tomorrow, same time if you want company." Tabitha hesitated. "Mr. Reeves, Xavier." "Xavier," she corrected. "I don't think this is proper. People will talk." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "People always talk in Kingman. Doesn't make what they say true." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and departed, leaving Tabitha with conflicted emotions. Part of her wanted to retreat back into her shell of misery, but another part, a tiny, resilient spark, welcomed the distraction he offered. That evening, her father broached the subject over dinner. "Margaret Wilkinson tells me you were seen with that cowboy who works for them, the quiet one Reeves." Tabitha set down her fork. "We shared a simple meal, father. He was being kind." "Kind, perhaps, but men often have motives beyond kindness," her father warned. "Especially with a young woman of your circumstances." "My circumstances?" Tabitha echoed, a flush rising to her cheeks. "You mean being publicly abandoned and humiliated?" Her mother intervened. "Your father merely wants to protect you from further pain, dear. You're vulnerable right now." "I'm not looking for another suitor if that's what concerns you," Tabitha said firmly. Mr. Reeves understood something that few others have, that sometimes simple companionship without judgment is what's needed most. Her parents exchanged glances, but mercifully dropped the subject. That night, for the first time since the wedding disaster, Tabitha slept without tears. The next day she found herself at the church steps again. Xavier was already there, basket in hand. This time he'd brought cold chicken and biscuits. "Wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "Neither was I," she replied honestly. They established a pattern over the following days. Each noon, they would meet at the church steps and share a simple meal. At first, conversation was minimal, but gradually, Tabitha began to open up about her life, her love of books, her failed attempts at painting, her dream of someday seeing San Francisco. Xavier proved to be a good listener. He spoke sparingly but thoughtfully, occasionally sharing stories of his own travels across the Western Territories. Tabitha learned he'd been a ranch hand, a silver miner, and briefly a stagecoach guard before settling in Kingman. A week after their first meal together, Tabitha asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you stay in Kingman? After everything with Sarah, you traveled so much. Why stop here?" Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Got tired of running, I suppose, and Kingman, it's growing. Has possibilities." He looked out toward the distant mountains. "My pa always said a man's got to put down roots somewhere if he wants something to grow." As June turned to July, their meetings continued, though they sometimes varied the location to avoid the increasing scrutiny of the townsfolk. They would walk by the creek east of town or sit under the large cottonwood near the schoolhouse. Tabitha found herself looking forward to these encounters, marking time by them rather than dwelling on her heartbreak. One afternoon, as they walked along the creek, Xavier asked, "Have you heard anything from Clayton?" Tabitha stiffened slightly. It was the first time either of them had mentioned her former fiancé by name. "A letter came yesterday. He's in California. Says he wasn't ready for the responsibilities of marriage and hopes I'll forgive him someday." She gave a hollow laugh. "As if forgiveness is what matters most right now." Xavier nodded. "What do you think matters most?" The question caught her off guard. She thought carefully before answering. "Understanding, I suppose. Understanding who I am without him. Before Clayton, I defined myself as the banker's daughter. Then I was Clayton's fiancée. Now, I need to discover who Tabitha Olsen really is." Xavier's eyes held hers for a long moment. "That's worth far more than forgiveness." As July progressed, the summer heat became oppressive. Their midday meetings shifted to early mornings or evenings when the temperature was more bearable. Tabitha's parents, seeing her emerging from her depression, had cautiously accepted her friendship with Xavier, though her father still harbored reservations. "The man has no property to speak of," he grumbled one evening after Xavier had walked Tabitha home. "Lives in a room above the livery and sends half his wages to his mother in Kansas." "We're just friends, father," Tabitha insisted, though lately she'd been questioning that assertion in her private thoughts. The truth was, something had shifted between them. It wasn't just in the lingering glances or the way Xavier's hand sometimes brushed hers as they walked. It was in the growing comfort of their silences and the unspoken understanding that seemed to flow between them. One evening in late July, they sat on a blanket near the creek, watching fireflies dance above the water. The air was heavy with the scent of wild sage, and the chirping of crickets formed a natural symphony around them. "I've been offered a new position," Xavier said suddenly. "Foreman at the Henderson Ranch outside Flagstaff." Tabitha felt her heart sink. "That's a good opportunity." "It is," he nodded. "Better pay, my own cabin. When would you leave?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Haven't accepted yet." Xavier turned to face her directly. "Wanted to talk to you first." Tabitha's pulse quickened. "Me? Why?" Xavier took a deep breath. "Because these past weeks with you have meant something to me, Tabitha. More than I expected when I sat down on those church steps that first day." "They've meant something to me too," she admitted softly. "I need to know if there's a reason for me to stay in Kingman." His eyes searched hers in the fading light. "A real reason." Tabitha felt a flutter of panic mixed with something else, something warm and frightening and exhilarating all at once. "Xavier, it's too soon. After Clayton, I'm not asking for promises," he interrupted gently. "Just honesty. If there's nothing here but friendship, I'll take that Henderson job with your blessing." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Tabitha thought of Clayton, of the pain he'd caused her. But she also thought of these weeks with Xavier, how he'd helped her find laughter again, how he'd listened without judgment, how his steady presence had become a cornerstone of her rebuilding life. "I don't know what this is between us," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not ready for it to end." The relief in Xavier's eyes was unmistakable. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Tabitha closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his mouth against hers, the tentative touch of his hand on her waist. When they parted, both were breathless. "I'll stay," Xavier said simply. August brought a change to their relationship. No longer meeting in secret, they were now officially courting, though Tabitha insisted on a slow pace. Xavier respected her boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. They attended church together on Sundays, endured the knowing looks and whispers of the townspeople, and gradually established themselves as a couple in Kingman's social fabric. Xavier continued working at the Wilkinson Ranch, but took on additional carpentry jobs in town to increase his savings. "What are you building?" Tabitha asked one Saturday, watching him work on what appeared to be an intricately carved box in the workshop he'd set up behind the livery. Xavier covered the piece with a cloth. "Something that's not ready yet." "A secret," she teased. "A surprise," he corrected with a smile. "Patience, Miss Olsen." Her return to using his surname was playful, and Xavier responded by gently tugging on one of her curls that had escaped its pins. This easy affection was new to Tabitha. Clayton had always been proper, almost formal in his attentions. Xavier's natural warmth made her realize how restrained her previous relationship had been. In mid-August, a letter arrived that threw their peaceful routine into disarray. Tabitha was helping her mother with preserving peaches when their housekeeper announced a messenger. The envelope bore Clayton's handwriting. Tabitha's hands trembled as she opened it, her mother watching with concern. The letter was brief but devastating. "My dearest Tabitha, I have made a terrible mistake. California has proven empty without you. I realize now that my fears were unfounded and my actions unforgivable. I am returning to Kingman on the 28th with the hope that you might find it in your heart to speak with me. I still love you, Tabitha. I always have. Yours eternally, Clayton." Tabitha sank into a chair, the letter clutched in her hand. Her mother read it over her shoulder and gasped. "The audacity of that man," she exclaimed. "After what he did to you." Tabitha said nothing, her mind whirling with confusion. After weeks of healing, of moving forward with Xavier, Clayton's words reopened wounds she thought had scarred over. "You won't see him, of course," her mother continued. "Your father will send him away." "I need to think, Mother," Tabitha said quietly, rising from the chair. "Please, I need some air." She walked aimlessly through town, barely noticing the greetings from neighbors. Eventually, her feet carried her to the church steps, the place where her heartbreak had begun, and where, in many ways, her healing had started. She sat heavily, staring at the worn wooden steps. What did she feel for Clayton now? Anger, certainly. Hurt still, but love. That emotion seemed distant, like a melody heard long ago that she could no longer fully recall. And what of Xavier? These past months with him had awakened something in her, a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a joy she'd never expected to find again. His steady presence had become essential to her days. The thought of losing him sent a wave of panic through her that was answer enough. She was still sitting there when Xavier found her an hour later. "Tabitha," concern etched his features as he approached. "Mrs. Peterson said you looked upset when you passed the general store." Wordlessly, she handed him Clayton's letter. She watched his expression change as he read it, a tightening around his eyes, a slight clench of his jaw. When he finished, he returned the letter without comment, his face carefully neutral. "What are you thinking?" he asked finally. "I'm thinking about choices," she replied. "About paths not taken and ones newly found." She looked up at him, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. "I'm thinking that Clayton made his choice months ago, and I've made mine since then." Relief flooded Xavier's features. He sat beside her on the step, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Are you sure? You and he had a history he threw away," she interrupted firmly. "What you and I have built is more real than anything I had with him." Xavier took her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "I won't pretend I'm not glad to hear that. "Will you be with me when he arrives?" she asked. "Not to confront him, that's something I need to do myself. But afterward, I'd like you nearby." "I'll be wherever you need me to be," he promised. August 28th arrived with ominous storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Tabitha dressed carefully in a blue dress that Xavier had once complimented, wanting to draw strength from the connection. Her parents had reluctantly agreed to allow her to meet Clayton alone at the hotel restaurant, though her father insisted on waiting nearby. The stagecoach arrived precisely at noon. Tabitha watched from the hotel porch as passengers disembarked, her heart hammering despite her resolve. Clayton was the last to step down, looking much as she remembered, handsome in his tailored suit, his blonde hair neatly combed. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and he gave her the confident smile that had once made her weak at the knees. Now, she felt nothing but a strange detachment. Clayton crossed to her, removing his hat. "Tabitha, you look lovely." "Hello, Clayton," she replied evenly. "Shall we go inside?" The restaurant was nearly empty, affording them privacy at a corner table. Clayton ordered coffee for them both, his manner easy as if their meeting were the most natural thing in the world. "You received my letter then," he began. "I did." Tabitha kept her hands folded in her lap to hide their slight tremor. "It was unexpected." Clayton leaned forward. "I know my actions hurt you deeply. There is no excuse for my cowardice, but Tabitha, these months away have shown me what truly matters in life, and that is you." Once, those words would have filled her with joy. Now they rang hollow. "Why did you leave, Clayton?" she asked. "The truth this time." He had the grace to look ashamed. Fear, pure and simple. Fear of being trapped in Kingman forever, fear of responsibility, fear of not being the husband you deserved. He reached for her hand. "But I've changed. I've secured a position with a banking firm in Tucson. We could start fresh there." Tabitha gently withdrew her hand. "There is no we anymore, Clayton, because of this cowboy I've heard about." His tone hardened slightly. "A temporary distraction, surely. We had plans, Tabitha, a future mapped out." "Plans you destroyed," she reminded him, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath. "And Xavier is not a distraction. He's the man who helped me piece myself together after you shattered me." Outside, thunder rumbled as the storm approached. Clayton's expression darkened to match it. "You can't seriously be choosing him over me," he said. "A penniless ranch hand with no prospects. Your father would never approve such a match." "My father has come to respect Xavier for his character, something money can't buy." Tabitha rose from her chair. "I didn't come here to compare the two of you, Clayton. I came to close this chapter of my life properly and wish you well in yours." Clayton stood as well, his composure cracking. "This is madness, Tabitha. We belong together. Everyone in town always said so." "Perhaps that was part of the problem," she replied softly. "We were together because it was expected, not because it was right." Rain began to patter against the windows as they faced each other across the table, Clayton's handsome features contorted with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You'll regret this," he warned. "When the novelty wears off and you're stuck in some ramshackle cabin with a man who can barely read, you'll remember what you threw away today." The insult to Xavier stoked Tabitha's temper. "Xavier reads Shakespeare by lamplight and can name every constellation in the sky. He listens when I speak and values my thoughts. Most importantly, when faced with difficulty, he doesn't run." She gathered her shawl. "Goodbye, Clayton. I truly hope you find happiness." She walked out, leaving him standing alone in the restaurant. Outside, the rain had intensified, but she barely noticed as she hurried down the street. Relief and sadness mingled within her. Relief at having finally closed the door on her past. Sadness for what might have been if Clayton had been a different man. Xavier was waiting at the edge of the hotel porch, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. One look at his face told her he'd been watching for her return. "It's done," she said simply. He nodded, studying her expression. "You all right?" "Yes," she replied, surprised to find it was true. "Better than all right." The rain fell harder, drumming on the porch roof. Xavier reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek that she hadn't realized was there. "That's the last one I'll cry over him," she promised. "Good," Xavier said. Then, with unexpected boldness, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not the gentle, questioning kisses they'd shared before, but one filled with certainty and promise. Tabitha responded with equal fervor, uncaring of who might see them. When they finally parted, breathless, Xavier kept her close. "I was afraid you might change your mind when you saw him again." "Never," she whispered against his chest. "My mind and my heart are exactly where they should be." The rain continued throughout the day, washing Kingman clean and bringing a welcome coolness to the August heat. By evening, when Xavier walked Tabitha home, the clouds had parted to reveal a brilliant sunset that painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Beautiful," Tabitha murmured, pausing to admire the view. "Yes," Xavier agreed, though his eyes were fixed on her profile. "Tabitha, there's something I need to ask you." Her heart quickened at his serious tone. "What is it?" "Not here." He took her hand. "Will you come with me? There's someplace I want to show you." Curious, she allowed him to lead her through town, past the livery and toward a small plot of land at the eastern edge of Kingman. It was a modest parcel, with a few trees and a partial foundation that looked newly laid. "What is this place?" she asked. Xavier took a deep breath. "It's mine. Bought it last week with my savings." Tabitha stared at him in surprise. "You bought land? When were you going to tell me?" "Now," he said with a slight smile, "was waiting for the right moment." He guided her toward the foundation. "Going to build a house here. Nothing fancy at first, 2 rooms to start, but designed to add on as needed." Tabitha looked at the foundation outline, trying to envision the house it would become. "It's a good location," she said. "Close enough to town, but with space to breathe." Xavier nodded. "That carved box you asked about, it's a jewelry box, wedding gift for my bride." His blue eyes met hers. "If she'll have me." Tabitha's breath caught in her throat as Xavier dropped to one knee in the soft earth, still damp from the rain. From his pocket, he withdrew a simple gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "Tabitha Olsen, I know it hasn't been long, and I know you've had your heart broken before. I'm not a wealthy man, and this land and a half-built house are all I have to offer right now. But I promise you this: I will love you honestly and completely every day of our lives. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes, but these were nothing like the bitter tears she'd shed on the church steps months ago. These were born of joy, pure and unexpected. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Xavier Reeves, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the pearl catching the last rays of sunset as he rose to his feet and pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. The news of their engagement spread quickly through Kingman. Most townsfolk responded with genuine happiness for the couple, though some, particularly those who had been closest to Clayton, expressed doubts about the hasty nature of the relationship. Tabitha's father, after an initial period of skepticism, gave his blessing when he saw Xavier's plans for the house and his determination to provide for his daughter. Her mother was won over more easily, having observed the positive change in Tabitha since Xavier had entered her life. "He may not be what I imagined for you," she admitted one afternoon as they sorted through Tabitha's trousseau, "but he brings light to your eyes that I've never seen before, not even with Clayton." The weeks following their engagement passed in a whirlwind of activity. Xavier worked from dawn until dusk on the house, assisted on weekends by friends from the Wilkinson Ranch and Tabitha's father, who surprised everyone with his previously unknown carpentry skills. Tabitha divided her time between preparing for marriage and teaching at the schoolhouse, having accepted a position when the previous teacher departed for California. They set the wedding date for October 15th, a Tuesday, which Xavier had chosen specifically because it was as different as possible from her previous wedding day. The ceremony would be small, held not in the church where she'd been abandoned, but in the garden behind her parents' home. The night before the wedding, Xavier took Tabitha to see the completed house. Though simply furnished with pieces either made by Xavier or contributed by friends, it was warm and inviting. The main room had a large stone fireplace, and the bedroom featured a window positioned to catch the morning sun. Most touching was the small bookshelf Xavier had built, already filled with volumes he'd collected knowing her love of reading. "It's perfect," she whispered, running her hand along the smooth wooden mantelpiece. "Not yet," Xavier replied. "Won't be perfect until you're here." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, with just enough chill in the air to hint at the approaching winter. Tabitha dressed in a new gown of ivory silk simpler than her previous wedding dress, but far more to her taste. As her mother arranged the veil, Tabitha asked suddenly, "Were you worried when I started spending time with Xavier? After everything with Clayton?" Her mother's hand stilled. "Of course I was. You were so broken, dear. I feared you might rush into something out of desperation or loneliness." She adjusted a pin in Tabitha's hair. "But then I watched you with him. You didn't cling to Xavier like a lifeline, you stood beside him as an equal. That's when I knew this was different." The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. Tabitha kept her eyes locked on Xavier's as they exchanged vows, barely hearing the minister's words. Xavier had never looked more handsome than he did in his new suit, his usually unruly dark hair tamed for the occasion. When he slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were steady, his voice clear and certain as he promised to love and cherish her all the days of his life. Tabitha's own voice trembled slightly with emotion as she made the same vows in return. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Their first kiss as a married couple was tender yet passionate, sealed with Xavier's whispered, "Forever," against her lips. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing continuing well into the evening. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the garden, casting a golden glow over the gathering. Xavier kept Tabitha close, his hand rarely leaving the small of her back as they moved among their guests. During a quiet moment as they watched the dancing from the edge of the garden, Xavier asked, "Any regrets, Mrs. Reeves?" Tabitha savored the sound of her new name on his lips. "Only that it took heartbreak to lead me to you." He smiled, drawing her closer. "Some treasures can only be found after weathering a storm." Later that night, alone in their new home, they discovered each other fully for the first time. Xavier was gentle and patient, guiding Tabitha through her initial nervousness until passion overcame hesitation. Their joining was tender yet fierce, a physical expression of the bond that had grown between them over the months. Afterward, lying in his arms as moonlight filtered through the bedroom window, Tabitha felt a profound sense of rightness. This was where she belonged, not with the man everyone had expected her to marry, but with the one who had waited on church steps and helped her find herself again. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. Xavier's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Tabitha Reeves. Always will." Life as a married couple brought adjustments for both of them. Xavier continued working at the Wilkinson Ranch while expanding his carpentry business in town. Tabitha taught at the school while managing their household, finding joy in creating a home that reflected both their personalities. Their first Christmas together was especially meaningful. They decorated their small house with pine boughs and red ribbons, and Xavier surprised Tabitha with a rocking chair he'd crafted in secret. She, in turn, presented him with a watch that had belonged to her grandfather, a family heirloom her father had entrusted to her for Xavier. "For the man who always keeps his promises," her father had said when giving her the timepiece. In February, Clayton returned to Kingman unexpectedly, ostensibly on banking business. The town buzzed with gossip about his arrival, and Tabitha tensed when she heard the news, unsure how she would feel seeing him again. The encounter, when it came, was brief and unexpectedly civil. She was leaving the school when Clayton approached her in the street. "Mrs. Reeves," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You look well." "Thank you, Clayton," she replied steadily. "What brings you back to Kingman? Business with your father's bank?" He glanced at the simple gold band on her finger. "I hear congratulations are in order. The town says you've never been happier." Tabitha was surprised by his lack of bitterness. The town speaks truth for once. An awkward silence fell between them before Clayton said, "I want you to know I'm glad for you, Tabitha. It took me time to see it, but you deserve happiness." "So do you, Clayton," she replied sincerely. He gave a small, sad smile. "Perhaps someday. Farewell, Tabitha." With that, he tipped his hat and continued down the street, a solitary figure soon lost in the afternoon shadows. That evening she told Xavier about the encounter. He seemed different, humbled somehow. Xavier listened thoughtfully. "People can change given reason enough." "Does it bother you that he's here?" she asked. Xavier shook his head. "No. There was a time it would have, but not anymore." He drew her close. "What we have isn't threatened by ghosts from the past." As winter gave way to spring, their life together blossomed like the wildflowers dotting the hills around Kingman. They added a small garden behind the house, where Tabitha grew vegetables, and Xavier built a wooden bench under a young cottonwood tree. In late April, Tabitha discovered she was expecting a child. The news filled them both with joy and trepidation. Xavier became even more protective, insisting on accompanying her to and from the schoolhouse despite her good-natured protests. "The baby won't be here for months," she reminded him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Just practicing," he replied with a grin, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. As her pregnancy progressed, Tabitha continued teaching, determined to complete the school year before taking time away. The children were delighted by the news of her impending motherhood, and her students presented her with handmade gifts for the baby. Xavier spent every spare moment expanding the house, adding a third room that would serve as the nursery. He worked with a fierce dedication, often continuing by lamplight after the sun had set. "You need to rest," Tabitha urged one night, finding him still planing wood well after midnight. "Want everything to be ready," he explained, setting aside his tools reluctantly. "Want it to be perfect for you both." She took his calloused hands in hers. "It already is perfect because we're building it together." The summer months brought sweltering heat to Kingman. Tabitha's pregnancy made the high temperatures even more challenging. But Xavier found ways to keep her comfortable, hanging wet sheets in the windows to cool the air and bringing home ice from town when it was available. In August, as they neared the anniversary of their first meeting on the church steps, Xavier surprised Tabitha with a special dinner. He'd cooked the entire meal himself, a feat that resulted in some interesting flavors, but touched her deeply with the effort involved. "Happy anniversary," he said, raising a glass of cider and toast. "Our wedding isn't until October," she reminded him with a smile. "Not that anniversary," he clarified. "1 year ago today was the first time I brought you lunch on those church steps." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the realization he'd remembered the exact date. "You saved me that day, Xavier Reeves." He shook his head, reaching across the table to take her hand. "No, Tabitha, you saved yourself. I just offered a friend when you needed one." "You offered much more than that," she said softly. "You offered me a future when I thought mine had ended." Their son, Samuel Reeves, was born on a crisp November morning after a difficult but ultimately successful labor. Tabitha had never seen Xavier so undone as when he first held his son, this strong, steady man, suddenly trembling with emotion as he cradled the tiny bundle. "He has your eyes," Xavier whispered, gazing in wonder at the infant's blue eyes. "And your stubborn chin," Tabitha replied tiredly but happily from the bed. Samuel brought a new dimension to their love, a shared adoration that deepened their bond, even as it challenged them with sleepless nights and new worries. Xavier proved to be a natural father, as patient with his son as he was with everything else in life. The following years brought both joys and hardships. A drought in '87 tested the entire region, forcing Xavier to travel for work when local opportunities dried up. Tabitha managed the household alone during his absences, her strength and resilience growing with each challenge overcome. Their second child, a daughter named Elena, arrived in 1888, completing their family. Unlike her quiet brother, Ellie was a spirited child from the start, with her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's determined nature. As the children grew, so did Kingman. The railroad brought new prosperity to the town, and Xavier's carpentry skills were increasingly in demand. By 1890, he had established a successful furniture business, employing 3 apprentices and earning a reputation for quality craftsmanship throughout the territory. Tabitha eventually returned to teaching, splitting her time between the schoolhouse and home. Her innovative methods earned praise from parents and the school board alike, and she began writing educational articles for newspapers in Prescott and Tucson. Life wasn't always easy. They faced illness when Samuel contracted scarlet fever at age 4, nearly losing him during the terrifying weeks of his recovery. Financial worries came and went as the economy fluctuated. They weathered arguments and misunderstandings, learning that love required work and forgiveness in equal measure. Through it all, they maintained one special tradition. Each year on the anniversary of their first meeting, they would share a simple lunch on the steps of the church where their story began. Sometimes the children joined them, pestering them to once again tell the tale of how Papa had waited for Mama when she needed a friend. In 1895, 10 years after Clayton had left Tabitha at the altar, they received news that he had died in a train accident in California. The information affected Tabitha more deeply than she'd expected, not from lingering romantic feelings, but from the sad recognition of a life cut short, of possibilities never realized. "He never married," she told Xavier quietly after the children were asleep. "Mother wrote that he lived alone in San Francisco, quite successful in banking but apparently solitary." Xavier held her close on the porch swing. "I'm sorry for him. No man should face life alone if he doesn't choose to. Sometimes I wonder if he ever found happiness," she mused. "If he ever found what we have." "Some treasures are harder to recognize than others," Xavier replied. "Not everyone knows what to look for." On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1900, with the new century dawning, Xavier presented Tabitha with a journal bound in soft leather. Inside, on the first page, he had written, For Tabitha, who found strength in broken places and taught me the true meaning of patience. The steps where we began led to a lifetime I never deserved but will forever cherish. All my love, Xavier, that night, as they lay in bed with moonlight once again streaming through their window, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have gone if Clayton hadn't left me that day? Xavier considered her question thoughtfully. Sometimes. But then I remember something my mother used to say, that God's greatest gifts often come disguised as disappointments. A wise woman, Tabitha murmured, settling into his embrace. She'd have loved you, Xavier said softly. Almost as much as I do. As they drifted toward sleep, Tabitha thought about the young woman who had collapsed in tears on church steps 15 years earlier, believing her life was over. How wrong she had been. That ending had merely been the beginning of something far more beautiful than she could have imagined, a love built not on societal expectations or convenience, but on understanding, patience, and the quiet strength of a man who had simply promised to wait. In the years that followed, Kingman continued to grow and change, as did the Reeves family. Samuel followed his father into carpentry, eventually taking over the business when Xavier's hands grew too arthritic for the fine work he had once excelled at. Eleanor became a teacher like her mother, bringing the same passion and creativity to her classroom. Xavier and Tabitha watched their children marry and start families of their own, their modest home becoming the gathering place for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. The love they had built weathered the passage of time, deepening into something unshakable and profound. Even in their 60s, they could still be found occasionally sitting on those church steps, sharing a simple meal and quiet conversation, a living testament to the healing power of patience and the unexpected blessings that can emerge from life's most painful moments. And whenever anyone asked how their remarkable journey had begun, Tabitha would smile and say, "I told him, he left me at the altar." And this wonderful, patient man replied, "Then I'll wait at the same steps tomorrow." To which Xavier would always add with a gentle squeeze of her hand, "And I've been waiting for her ever since the most rewarding wait of my life."